I remember the date perfectly, because it was the day my mother-in-law slapped my 8-year-old son in front of 23 people. And by the end of that night, her entire family looked at her differently, including her own son, my husband. But before I tell you what happened, you need to understand who my mother-in-law really was. Because people like Margaret don't become cruel overnight. They spend years practicing. My name is Emily Carter, and if you've ever dealt with a toxic in-law who thought they controlled the entire family, this story is for you. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe because what happened later that night shocked everyone at that table. Now let's go back. When I married my husband David, I thought I was marrying into a loving family. I was wrong. Very wrong. Margaret ruled that family like a queen. Every holiday, every birthday, every gathering, everything revolved around her. Everyone walked on eggshells around her, including David, especially David. For years, I tried to get along with her. I really did. I smiled. I stayed polite. I ignored insults. I accepted criticism. But nothing was ever enough. According to Margaret, I wasn't good enough for her son. My cooking wasn't good enough. My parenting wasn't good enough. My career wasn't good enough. Everything I did was somehow wrong. Then our son Noah was born, and things got worse, much worse. At first, Margaret acted loving, but as Noah grew older, she became critical of him too. He was too quiet, too sensitive, too emotional, too shy. The same things she used to say about me. The difference? I could handle it. He was 8 years old. One evening, Noah asked me a question I'll never forget. "Mom, why doesn't Grandma like me?" That question broke my heart, because no child should ever wonder that. I hugged him and told him it wasn't true. But deep down, I wasn't sure. Then Thanksgiving arrived, the holiday that changed everything. Margaret insisted on hosting. As always, 23 people attended. Aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors, everyone. The house was packed. At first, everything seemed normal. People laughed, kids played, food filled the tables. Then dinner started. And Noah accidentally spilled a small amount of cranberry juice. Not much, just a little. The kind of thing every child does. The kind of thing that should have taken 30 seconds to clean up. But Margaret exploded, immediately. She stood up so fast her chair nearly fell over. The entire room went silent. Then she started yelling, at an 8-year-old child. Noah froze. Everyone froze. I waited for someone to stop her. Nobody did. Then Margaret pointed directly at Noah and called him careless, spoiled, embarrassing. The words kept coming, and Noah's eyes filled with tears. My husband looked uncomfortable, but before he could say anything, something happened nobody expected. Margaret stepped forward, raised her hand, and slapped Noah across the face. The sound echoed through the dining room. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nobody spoke. My little boy sat there shocked, holding his cheek, trying not to cry. And that's when something inside me snapped, completely. I stood up slowly, very slowly. The entire room watched. Margaret looked satisfied, like she thought she'd taught him a lesson. Instead, she had just made the biggest mistake of her life, because the next 6 words that came out of my mouth changed everything. The entire room was silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even looked away. My son sat there holding his cheek, tears forming in his eyes. The red mark from Margaret's hand was still visible, and for one terrifying second, I thought I might completely lose control. But instead, I became calm, very calm, the kind of calm that scares people. Then I looked directly at Margaret and said 6 words, "Touch him again and leave." The room froze. Margaret blinked, almost like she couldn't believe what she'd heard. Nobody had spoken to her like that before. Nobody. For decades, she controlled every room she entered, every conversation, every holiday, every family gathering. And now, someone had finally challenged her, in front of everyone. Margaret laughed, actually laughed. Then she said, "This is my house." I nodded. "Then enjoy it without us." The room became even quieter, because suddenly, everyone realized I was serious. I walked over to Noah, kneeled beside him, and gently wiped away his tears. Then I asked him something. "Do you want to stay here?" He immediately shook his head. "No." That single word broke my heart, because an 8-year-old child should never feel unsafe around family. Never. I stood up, took Noah's hand, then looked at David, my husband. The entire room turned toward him, waiting, watching. Because for years, David always avoided conflict. Always. Especially when it involved his mother. And now he had a choice. The biggest choice of his life. Protect his mother, or protect his son. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then David slowly stood up, walked over to Noah, and put his arm around him. My heart almost stopped, because I knew what was happening. For the first time in his life, David was finally choosing. Then he looked directly at Margaret and said, "You owe my son an apology." Margaret looked shocked, completely shocked, because she expected support, not resistance. Then she did what she always did. She tried to become the victim. "He spilled juice." Nobody responded. "He embarrassed me." Still nobody responded. Then David said something that changed everything. "Mom," his voice was calm, "you assaulted an 8-year-old child." The room exploded. Several relatives immediately started agreeing. An aunt spoke up, a cousin spoke up, even David's uncle spoke up. People who had stayed silent for years, people who were finally tired of her behavior. One by one, the support Margaret expected disappeared. Then something unexpected happened. David's older aunt stood up, a woman in her 70s, the only person Margaret ever listened to, and she said, "This should have happened years ago." The room went silent. Margaret looked horrified, because suddenly, her authority was gone. The illusion had shattered. Everyone could finally see her behavior for what it really was: bullying, control, cruelty. Then I noticed something strange. Noah wasn't crying anymore. He was watching. Watching his father defend him. Watching adults stand up for him. Watching people tell the truth. And I realized something important. This moment wasn't just about Margaret. It was about Noah. About teaching him something. Teaching him he never had to accept abuse. From anyone. Not strangers, not family, not even grandparents. Especially grandparents. Then Margaret demanded everyone leave. But almost nobody moved. Because the conversation wasn't finished. Not even close. Then David said words I never expected to hear. "If you can't apologize to my son, don't expect us back." Margaret went pale. Because for the first time, there were consequences. Real consequences. And what happened next was something she never saw coming. Because before the night ended, a family secret would be revealed. A secret explaining why Margaret always treated Noah differently. A secret she'd hidden for years. And when that truth came out, her entire world would collapse. Nobody left. Not a single person. Margaret stood in the middle of the dining room, furious, embarrassed, exposed. But the worst part for her was still coming. Because David wasn't finished. Not even close. He looked directly at his mother, then asked a question. A question he should have asked years ago. "Why have you always treated Noah differently?" The room became silent again. Margaret immediately looked away. That alone was suspicious. Very suspicious. Because Margaret always had an answer. Always. But this time, nothing. Then David asked again. "Why?" Still no answer. Then David's Aunt Carol slowly stood up and what she said next changed everything. Because Noah reminds her of someone. The room froze. Margaret's face turned white. Absolutely white. For the first time all night, she looked terrified. "Aunt Carol?" David whispered. "What are you talking about?" Carol sighed, the kind of sigh someone makes after carrying a secret for too long. Then she said, "Your father." Nobody understood. Not yet. Then Carol continued, "When Noah smiles, he looks exactly like your father looked at that age." Margaret immediately interrupted. "Stop." But Carol kept going. "No, not anymore." Then she looked at everyone and revealed the truth. Years ago, long before David met me, long before Noah was born, Margaret had treated David's father exactly the same way, controlling him, belittling him, humiliating him, especially in public. And eventually, David's father stopped fighting, stopped arguing, stopped standing up for himself. The family thought he became quiet because of age, but Carol knew better. He became quiet because he was exhausted. Years of emotional abuse had broken him. Then Carol said something that made the entire room gasp. "The last conversation I had with your father, he told me he wished someone had stood up to Margaret." Silence. Pure silence. Then she looked directly at Noah. "Tonight someone finally did." My eyes filled with tears, because suddenly everything made sense. The criticism, the control, the constant need to dominate. Margaret wasn't disciplining Noah. She was repeating a pattern, the same pattern she'd used for decades. Then something unexpected happened. Noah stood up. My sweet little 8-year-old boy, still holding my hand, still scared, but brave, very brave. Then he looked at Margaret and quietly asked, "Why don't you like me?" The question shattered the room, because unlike the adults, he wasn't angry, he wasn't accusing, he genuinely wanted to know. Margaret started crying, real tears, for the first time all night. Then she sat down and finally admitted the truth. "It was never about you." Noah looked confused. So did everyone else. Then Margaret whispered, "I saw your grandfather in you." More tears. "And every time I looked at you, I remembered every mistake I made." Nobody spoke, because suddenly this wasn't about anger anymore. It was about regret. Years and years of regret. Then she looked directly at Noah and said the words nobody expected. "I'm sorry." Noah didn't answer immediately. Neither did anyone else, because everyone understood how important that moment was. Then Noah did something remarkable, something most adults struggle to do. He nodded and said, "Okay, that's it. One word. No speech, no revenge, no drama, just grace. More grace than Margaret deserved." Several family members started crying, including me, including David, even Aunt Carol. Because sometimes, children teach adults how to behave, not the other way around. That night changed our family forever. We didn't magically become perfect. Healing takes time, trust takes time, forgiveness takes time. But things changed. Real change. Margaret started therapy, something she once mocked. She apologized to family members, people she had hurt for years, and most importantly, she never raised her hand to Noah again, not once. Today Noah is 16, tall, confident, kind, and every Thanksgiving, he sits at the same table, not because he forgot what happened, because he learned something more important. People can change, but only after they're forced to face the truth. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more emotional family dramas, shocking betrayals, powerful life lessons, and unforgettable endings. And remember, the strongest person in the room isn't always the loudest. Sometimes it's the person brave enough to protect a child. The end.